Hi all, and welcome back to An Aside with Alan. This is volume 3, and today we're going to look at why the first past the post system sucks. This is a rant that my students will have heard before, but they seem to enjoy it, so I thought I'd turn it into a video. So we're going to look at the 2019 election to try and put this into context. Right, so the first past the post system, if you don't already know, is a system that is used in UK general elections. Essentially, the country is divided into 650 constituencies. In each constituency, the candidate who gets the most votes wins that seat. Doesn't matter if they win by 1 vote or 27,000 votes, they win that one seat. Theoretically, constituencies are supposed to all be the same size. However, the largest constituency is in fact twice the size in terms of voters as the smallest constituency. So that hasn't really worked out. I'm not a big fan of first past the post, and I'll try and explain why. Other views on this are of course available, just not here. So let's have a look at the 2019 election. So the table shows the difference between the percentage of the vote won in 2017 by the different parties and that one in 2019. So as you look at the different tables, the column in red is the 2017 result. The column in kind of grey is the 2019 result, and then in the slightly weird greeny colour is the swing. So as we can see, the Conservatives gained a little bit of the percentage of the vote, but it was very, very marginal. The Labour Party did very badly and lost a considerable chunk of vote. The Liberal Democrats actually did really quite well in terms of percentage of the vote. They gained about 3%. And the SNP did a little bit better, gaining just under 1% of the vote. So we look at this and if we go, right, this is the voter percentage. We would expect marginal gains for the Conservative Party, a drop from Labour, a substantial gain from the Liberal Democrats, and marginal gains from the SNP. So what actually happened in terms of seats? Well, this is the graphs looking at the number of seats. So as you can see, the Conservatives actually gained really quite considerably, not shown by the percentage increase, which had only gone up marginally from about 42.5% up to, well, just 1% more, really. I mean, it wasn't a massive gain, but they did gain a substantial jump in seats. So they went up from 317 all the way up to 365. So they gained 48 seats with a 1% swing. Labour, as you can see, lost seats, not quite as dramatically as they lost votes, but they did lose seats. The Liberal Democrats, they did slightly worse. So they gained 3% of vote and they lost a seat. The SNP gained considerably in terms of seats, whilst having only gained very marginally in terms of votes. So inherently, the system seems to be a little bit unfair. And now, if we compare the percentage of votes with the percentage of seats, we can see that we've got a quite striking kind of degree of irregularity here. So the Conservatives do much better on seats than they do on percentage of the vote. The Labour Party, it's pretty equal, actually. There's not a huge differential between those. They do slightly worse on the number of seats than they do on percentage of seats as they do on percentage of the vote. The Liberal Democrats are the big losers here, and the SNP are definitely gainers. So of these, so the Conservatives and the SNP get a good deal out of first past the post. Labour is fairly neutral, and the Liberal Democrats, they do really badly. Now, if we then think about this and what it led to in terms of some of the arguments, and this is particularly true in terms of the way a lot of the media presented the results, and these are kind of the headline grabbing stuff, and stuff that Boris himself said and was on the front page of a lot of the newspapers. The 2019 election result was a ringing endorsement of Boris's Brexit strategy. Now, The numbers don't really back that up, because the Conservatives gained 43.6% of the vote, which means that 56.4% of the vote was against them. So if this had been a referendum on the Brexit deal, it would have been rejected. And again, this is one of the difficulties we've seen in modern day with the interjection of the referendum in between general elections, and the results have tended to be very different in them. Now, this was supposedly the Brexit election. Now, even if you add all the Brexit Party votes and the UKIP votes to that number of Tory seats, you still don't get to 50%. So the media and the politicians said, well, essentially, that's the whole Brexit thing done. That is the definitive answer on it. The electorate have spoken. But it only really means that the electorate have spoken if you look at it in terms of our electoral system. You look at it first past the post, yes, the Conservatives won a really strong majority, but that doesn't mean they won necessarily a resounding level of support in terms of percentage of the vote. Right, another argument that came out, and interestingly, it was the Conservatives who then shut this down fairly quickly. The SNP came out and said, look, we just won over 40 seats in the election, so we have now gained the vast majority of the constituencies in Scotland. This shows that there is a demand amongst the Scottish people for a second independence referendum. Now, those numbers look quite convincing. But if you look at it in terms of the percentage of the votes, and this is what the Conservatives then did on this, is they pointed out that the SNP had not won the majority of the votes in Scotland. And even if you added the Green vote, and the Green Party in Scotland was also advocating independence referendum, then you still don't get to 50%. And therefore, the Conservative government turned around and said, look, there is no clear demand for a second independence referendum. So again, they're using the statistics one way, but not necessarily the other. So what we're left with? So we're left with a party in power that received 43.6% of 67.3% of the vote. So 67.3% was the turnout. And that left them with a majority of 80 in the House of Commons. And we have our upper chamber, the House of Lords, that can only delay. So that's given them an incredible amount of power. And they, by far and away, obviously, on our voting system, they won the election, and they won it by a considerable distance. But what I would question on that, in terms of the electoral system, is does that give a true reflection of the views of the British people? And one thing I always remember feeling when I was growing up, starting getting interested in politics, is I see all the stuff in the news and the media and the comedians and things like that, and go, nobody seems to like the government. Why is that? And they kept on winning majorities. And you look at it, well, actually, because governments are always, because of our system, they're always a minority in terms of percentage of the vote. But that doesn't necessarily mean they are a minority in the House of Commons. So we're left also with these claims that the Brexit policy had universal backing, which clearly, looking at the numbers, it didn't. And they used that same statistical method that would disprove their claims to disprove the demand for a second independence referendum. Now, and this is just a weird quirk of the maths of it all, the parliamentary party that made the biggest gains in votes were the Liberal Democrats. They quite a substantial jump in their vote. So they jumped from about 7.5% to about 11.5% of the vote. So they've taken a considerable leap, but they lost the seat. That seat just happened to be the seat of their leader. So again, headlines about the demise of the Liberal Democrats, about how they had a terrible election, but they actually increased their vote more than anybody else. Again, victims of the system. But we also see other victims of the system, and from the most noticeable ones in recent elections have been parties like UKIP and the Brexit Party, who at various points have gained substantial numbers of votes, but not seen it converted into places in Parliament. Right. This is one of the big bugbears of me, and mine. And I should say this: I am a history teacher, but this is something I've heard repeated by GCSE history teachers across the land, and it's simply not true. And one of the arguments is always put against the idea of a more proportional system is that it was a proportional representation system that led to the Nazis coming into power in Germany. That is not true. In 1933, the Nazis won just under 44% of the vote. They were the biggest party, but they didn't have a majority. They therefore had to go into a coalition. It was the failings of other German politicians, including, and quite notably, the president, Hindenburg at the time, that allowed them into power. They could have been stopped. They didn't have a majority. Therefore, the Reichstag could have prevented Hitler and his actions. Obviously, circumstances took over. We had things like the Reichstag fire, enabling acts, all that kind of stuff. But none of that was the fault of the voting system. Now, just interesting in terms of the numbers, in 2019, the Conservative Party won just under 44% of the vote, and they went in with a majority of 80. So if you transfer the voting systems over, then the first past the post system actually would have been more likely to give you an overwhelming Nazi majority in 1933, as opposed to the proportional representation system that should have left politicians in a position where they could have moderated or restrained or stopped a Nazi government. So that's just a bit of history to add to our politics for today. Right, again, please don't forget to comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you for tuning in. See you again soon.